This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Khanam.
And I'm Jamal Dajani.
Jamal, we have a great show today. There's a lot to talk about, actually. We're going to be talking about what happened to a well-known journalist, comedian, podcaster, Katie Halper, who was fired by The Hill for her. I don't even know what to call it anymore. She basically said, yes, Israel practices apartheid and we need to confront it and join the BDS movement, just like we did in South Africa. Obviously, and by the way, she happens to be a Jewish American at the same time. She was crucified, vilified, and fired by The Hill. And we're going to talk about her case a little bit. We're also going to be talking about the 4 years since the brutal murder of Jamal Khashoggi, where there's key pieces of evidence that are still missing, according to his fiance, who says that that information is in the hands of the Turkish government. His cell phone, his iPad, his laptop has really important information, and she's not able to get it released from the Turkish government, which is really unfortunate. So we're going to be covering those two stories in depth. But before we get there, we're going to watch an interview that you did with Diana Buttu, who is a former legal advisor to the PLO. She's going to talk about I still have these images in my mind, Jamal, but the death of 7-year-old Rayyan Suleiman. This was the young boy who was chased and terrorized to death. The U.S. indifference to the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh and the Israeli Prime Minister's speech at the United Nations. It's a far-reaching interview with Diana and well worth watching and listening to.
That's right, Jess. And let's go to Diana Buttu. Thousands of Palestinians turned out last Friday to mourn a 7-year-old Rayyan Suleiman who died while being chased by Israeli occupation soldiers on Thursday. An account rejected by the Israeli army, but which prompted the US State Department to call for an investigation. Rayyan was running away from the soldiers in the occupied West Bank village of Tekoa after Israeli soldiers tried to enter his uncle's house. Israeli soldiers have killed 35 Palestinian children, 19 in the West Bank and 16 in the Gaza Strip since the beginning of this year, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. Joining us to discuss this and more, Diana Buttu. Diana Buttu is a Palestinian-Canadian lawyer and former spokesperson for the Palestine Liberation Organization. Welcome again to Arab Talk, Diana.
Thank you, Jamal. It's always nice to have you on.
This is a heart-wrenching story, really shocked everyone probably. 7-year-old was literally scared to death. Israel has ramped up its attacks and incursions on Palestinian towns and villages since the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh. Any more details about the death of Rayyan Suleiman and why are we seeing this uptick in Israeli incursions, especially in Jenin?
Oh, Jamal, we're seeing this because they can. There has been nobody who has put the brakes on Israel's murdering machine at all. We had expected, we being Palestinians in Palestine and globally, had somehow thought that with Shireen's murder, that there would be some pressure that would be brought to bear on the Israeli government. But instead, we've seen that there's been no pressure, or like just simple, a surface pressure that's been brought to bear on Israel. And so all of this continues, everything from the invasions into West Bank cities and towns, the bombing campaign over the Gaza Strip, the fact that they can go in and arrest kids, sometimes from school, the fact that this poor little boy ended up dying from fear. His heart stopped from fear. And there seems to be no end and there's no even consciousness that's present inside Israel to ask themselves why. And given that doesn't exist, I don't expect it to ever exist. This is what colonizers do. one would have at least expected that people from the outside would be pressing for a stop, but they aren't. Instead, they've effectively given Israel the green light.
And last week we had a representative from Al-Haq a couple of weeks ago. We also had someone from Ad-Damir. And also at the same time, they've shut down basically Palestinian civil society. There is no end in sight, despite a rejection of these so-called terror charges by both the United States and the European Union. You find the Israelis are still on a campaign to convince the world that what they've done is right, and all Palestinians basically are terrorists.
Yeah, that's because, Jamal, that's the last frontier. When you think about what it is that Israel has done, they have effectively killed off any forms of resistance and labeled and outlawed any form of resistance. So if you look at resistance has been banned. It's been sidelined. It's been given all of these labels. The world stands against actual resistance. Then when you go down to the next level of the Palestinian Authority has itself been chopped down, also by its own making, to be clear, but also by the Israelis. They've been the second arm of attack on the part of Israel. The third wing of attack, or the third level of attack, has been on the BDS movement and on civil society globally, with all of the attempts to try to crush BDS. And this fourth is to try to crush civil society as a whole. That's why I'm actually very worried for people who are in these organizations. I don't take their statements very lightly when they indicate to the heads of these organizations that they will suffer consequences. I don't take those threats at all lightly, because we've seen that they have done everything in their power to either assassinate or imprison, or both. When it comes to leaders of political parties, when it comes to the Palestinian Authority, and now we're seeing it when it comes to civil society as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this. I mean, they've arrested some, released them, but that's the first kind of, and many of those leaders in these organizations have received phone calls threatening them. I want to move on to this topic, which really first, I don't know if sometimes you want to laugh at it or you want to cry, in a statement issued shortly after Russian President Vladimir Putin signed treaties to incorporate the regions of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporozhye into the Russian Federation. Israel Foreign Ministry, and this is what he said, that they support the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. We want to recognize the annexation of the 4 areas by Russia. Then we have US President Biden saying that Putin can't seize his neighbor's territory and get away with it. And earlier, Secretary of State Blinken denounced the referendums in Ukraine as Russian land grab. I want to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's as you put it, you don't know whether to laugh or to cry. And we've seen these parallels time and again with the way that the Israelis have behaved when it comes to Ukraine versus the way that they behave when it comes to their own action, and the way that the United States has reacted to the Ukraine and to Russia versus the way that the United States has reacted when it comes to Israel. It's sadly laughable, but yet it highlights the hypocrisy. Here we are 8 months into this war, and 8 months into it, we're seeing that the hypocrisy is only deepening further and further and further, where with everything from people who are in Ukraine who are resisting being labeled freedom fighters, whereas Palestinians are not. Where we see that Israel is so trying to align itself and claim that it is somehow Ukraine, when in fact it is an aggressor. And we see that when it comes to this issue of annexation, that Israel was one of the first countries to say that they don't recognize this annexation, and yet they do recognize it when it comes to their own annexation. It's laughable, because all that they need to do is, using that same argument, all that they need to do is somehow just claim that this is their historical land, and and be done with it, because that's what Israel seems to have done, and the world seems to have gone along with it. The whole process, Jamal, is quite stark and quite laughable. In fact, just yesterday, the U.S. ambassador to the OSCE had also put out a tweet saying that that imagine how you would feel if somebody came and took over your land and claimed that it was theirs. So, well, like, we know exactly how it feels. We don't need to imagine, because we live through this day in and day out. And so this hypocrisy is always shining through, and it's very clear that when the world wants to apply international norms, they do, and when they don't, they don't.
Politics aside, I mean, do Israelis believe these lies? I mean, the average Israeli, outside those politicians, do they actually believe, do they bury their heads in the sand when we talk about that they've annexed the Syrian Golan Heights or East Jerusalem and so forth?
Absolutely, they've buried themselves, their heads in the sand. In the minds of Israelis here, all of these are not annexations. They're either one of two things. It's either temporary or necessary. And temporary means that, it doesn't have to be in this generation, but in some generation, it will go back. And necessary is because they've decided that it is necessary. There's, I don't know if you've been following so closely, but even when it came to Israel accepting people from Ukraine as refugees, Israel doesn't allow refugees into the country. They've not ever signed on to the refugee treaty. They did, however, allow a limited number of people from the Ukraine to come in, but under conditions. The first being that their family members had to submit a very heavy deposit, close to $10,000 US, that will be returned to them upon their departure. And the second condition, it's not a condition, but a second sort of interesting thing, was that many of these refugees were being housed in settlements. So you can see how Israel is both selective in the way that it views humanitarianism. It's all for show. But really, at its core, what it aims to do is to seek and to strengthen its colonial roots. That's it.
Well, there was also, I think, an article today that mentioned Avigdor Lieberman saying that they want to see more Russian immigrants coming into the country.
Yes, provided that they're the right religion, being Jewish. And that's the whole point. This was the big debate surrounding those from the Ukraine, was that they wanted them to be Jewish, and if they weren't Jewish, well, then really, do we really want to be? This is again in their words. Do we really want to be diluting Israel with people who are not Jewish? You can see it's a racist colonial project, and as much as they try to sell to the world that it's not a racist colonial project, it is, and it shines through very, very clearly. It's just a question of whether people want to see it.
So the Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid came to the United Nations and saying that a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was the right thing for Israel. And he said, despite all the obstacles, a large majority of Israelis support the vision of this two-state solution. One of them, a future state will be, a Palestinian state will be a peaceful one. And he went on to talk about terror. I mean, is this another dog and pony show? I mean, who was he talking to? Was he talking to the international community? I mean, because this is not what he says to the Israeli public.
No, he definitely doesn't say this at all to the Israeli public. To the Israeli public, he tries to show that he is a hawk, because he is a hawk, by the way. I think we make a mistake by labeling him center. He's not at all center. This is the same man who said that his father didn't come to Palestine to be ruled over by Arabs. He's a racist. He's a racist to his core, but he is also somebody who is very well experienced and understands that what the international community wants to hear is some level of moderation. And it seems to be the case that all you have to say are the words two-state solution, and world leaders salivate all over you. It's like, oh, he said the magic words. Oh, he said the magic words. But really, actions on the ground have proven to be the exact opposite. Yair Lapid is a hawk. He's less of a hawk than some of the other people are, but he's a hawk and he's a racist, and he does not believe in freedom for Palestinians. If he did, he has the ability to stop settlements. He has the ability to make sure that these apartheid laws get overturned. He has that ability, but he's chosen not to, because at his core, like all of the other leaders, they fundamentally believe in the concept of a greater Israel. They fundamentally believe that Palestinians should not be equal. They fundamentally do not believe in the right of return. And they fundamentally never want to see Palestinian freedom. So yes, he said the words, but these were words that were directed towards the international community so that he can get their support come election time. And they weren't at all directed towards the Israeli people. Israelis don't care about what happens to Palestinians. It's been shown time and time again in poll after poll just how little it is that they care about Palestinians. And so, yes, we can talk about, these like fantasies of a two-state solution, but when Israelis are actually forced to make a decision about evacuating settlements, we saw what happened in 2005. And that was in the days when the Israeli public was less right-wing than it is today.
Then we saw, I want you to comment on the speech by President Mahmoud Abbas. He had a whole list of complaints, and I don't know, again, what was the end game for him? I mean, we've seen the show again, and I mean, were people paying attention to what he was saying?
It was like a rinse repeat. It was on the rinse repeat cycle, rinse repeat cycle. And I don't think he has anything different to say. Look, I want to step back for a second and talk about why he said what he said. You might recall, Jamal, that a year ago when he went before the UN, he said, if in a year's time things have not changed, then I'm going to have to make a decision. So here was his decision. But at its core, it doesn't mean anything. He's been saying these same statements over and over again, which is that they no longer recognize Oslo, that they're no longer going to abide by the agreements. But when push comes to shove, Oslo is about security arrangements. That is all that it is about. That is all that is left of it. And he still to this day continues to abide by it. Just today, we saw that Israel assassinated 2 young men. And it's not that the Palestinian Authority is going to do anything or stop security collaboration, or that it's going to actually begin to defend Palestinians or begin to support resistance. It's going to do nothing. So for as much as he says that he doesn't believe in Oslo, or that he's suspending Oslo or not recognizing Oslo, he continues to do everything to make sure that he does recognize Oslo, because at the end of the day, all that he's looking for is international support, not for Palestinians, but for the survival of the Palestinian Authority.
One final question about the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh. I mean, it has definitely garnered international attention, yet the United States has literally done nothing.
Yes.
And what's the message? I mean, what's the message here from Palestinians as far as getting justice? I know that the Abu Akleh family either has filed or is filing with the ICC. I mean, is this the only route, since the United States really elected not to stand with its own citizen?
The avenues, there are a number of different avenues, Jamal, that the family can pursue. The main thing that the family has been pushing for is that they keep saying that it shouldn't be up to them as individuals to be pursuing these avenues. It shouldn't be that the Abu Akleh family has to fly all the way to Washington, D.C. to get a meeting with Secretary Blinken. It shouldn't be that the family has to go from knock on one door at Congress to another door at Congress to be getting support. But that's unfortunately what they had to do. The Abu Akleh family flew to Washington, D.C. in July this year, this summer. They had a meeting with Secretary Blinken. They went from pretty much from door to door, knocking on the doors of representatives of Congress to demand justice. And yes, there are other avenues that are open, but it shouldn't be the case. It should be that this administration is doing it on its own. After all, this is not just any other country. This is the country, meaning Israel. This is the country that receives the most in terms of US taxpayer dollars, more than any country. If you take away Egypt, it's more than the entire continent of Africa. And yet Israel continues to get this money without conditions year after year. We know that the weaponry comes from the United States. There's an obligation on the US to pursue this, and yet they've chosen not to. So instead, we see that there have been two small developments since Shireen's murder. The first is that Hadi Amr actually met with the family of Omar Assad, Omar Assad being the 80-year-old man who was killed by the Israeli army in January of this year. He's a Palestinian American. He was dragged out of his car, thrown onto a construction site, and left to die. Hadi has actually met with the family. The second is that
just to clarify, who's Hadi Amr?
Hadi Amr is the Assistant Undersecretary of State for Near East. And so he effectively, in simpler terms, maybe. So he has met with Hadi Amr, who is a representative to Secretary Blinken. He was effectively instead of the consul general being the number one, he is the person who liaises the most with the Palestinian Authority. He has met with the Omar Assad family, the family of Omar Assad. Omar Assad, as you know, is the 80-year-old man who was dragged out of his car early this year in January on one of the coldest nights of the year at 3:00 in the morning, thrown onto a construction site and left to die with his hands shackled. Since Shireen's murder, we've seen that this meeting has actually taken place, something that hadn't happened in the past. The second development is that the US administration is now calling for rules of engagement, to have changed rules of engagement.
Right.
What that means is that they recognize that there's a problem, because there is a problem. I can tell you, Jamal, as somebody who spends a great deal of time in the West Bank, that your life can be taken away at any moment for any reason whatsoever. It's not at all surprising to me that little boy named Rayyan actually died of fear, because you can see the fear in the eyes of children who've been terrorized their entire lives, and who hear the stories day after day after day of our young people being killed and their bodies never being returned. Jamal, just since the beginning of this year, Israel has killed close to 150 Palestinians. That's almost, almost every day that we are having a funeral for a young Palestinian. That's almost every single day. And so when the US says that they want to examine the rules of engagement, it's because they know that there are no rules of engagement. The rules are you get to do whatever it is that you want to do, and nobody is ever going to hold you to account.
Diana Buttu, thank you for coming on Arab Talk.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jamal.
That's the voice and the face of Diana Buttu, former PLO legal representative and basically Palestine legal expert, Diana Buttu. And as usual, Jamal, Diana is spot on, very cogent. And she highlights the ongoing thing that we've been talking about, the hypocrisy when it comes to American citizens or assaults to children basically in Palestine, a 7-year-old boy, Rayyan Suleiman. Very compelling interview. I wish more people would listen to Diana and hear what she has to say.
Yeah, Jess, I mean, how often have we spoken about Palestinians getting silenced, Jess, or getting fired, like Mark Lamont Hill on CNN and others? And so our next story deals with the most recent one, which is The Hill, which, by the way, The Hill pretends to be, I wouldn't say it pretends to be progressive, but
nonpartisan,
nonpartisan, and it's all for freedom of expression and freedom of speech and so on. So, that's the latest story that we're going to be talking about, which is The Hill has fired Katie Halper from its morning show, Rising, for describing Israel's policies as tantamount to apartheid. Blatant act of censorship to silence pro-Palestinian voices, or actually just voices who want to hold Israel responsible and accountable. Exactly. And she's, of course, as you've mentioned, she has many roles. She's also the co-host of Useful Idiots with Mike Taibbi and The Rising. And before long, I mean, I want to go maybe a little bit into, for those who are not aware, and of course, Katie Halper, she put her own video on YouTube explaining what happened, but basically over a report where she defends Rashida Tlaib for the attacks that she was facing.
Exactly.
Because of the term of apartheid, which is not anyone's inventions, but it's based on reports by Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Israel's own human rights organization, B'Tselem, the United Nations, and so on. So this is not, like in the past, you could not use
not breaking news.
that word, they're trying to strike fear in your heart when you go near that A word. But everybody's saying Israel's an apartheid state. Their own politicians are saying that Israel's an apartheid state. Israel's own former attorney general wrote a whole op-ed describing Israel as an apartheid state. So that's the latest victim. So of course, the first thing they do is, if you have a story like this, then they kill the story. And that's what happened. She had her show, they killed the show. And then when she questioned, why did you kill the show? What happened? The next step, she gets fired.
That's right. And it should be, we should just add a little bit more detail. She's been producing these shows for a very long time, Jamal, and she's never been called out or editorialized or edited out or denied any of her shows in the past. This is the first time in, hundreds of shows that she's done where her story was denied access, let alone, being fired for her views, Jamal. She made a very compelling argument and analysis on her YouTube kind of explanation of this. And she goes, yeah, I get labeled as a self-hating or self-loathing Jew, but if you happen to be Arab or Muslim, you get viciously attacked as an anti-Semite. So she was able to call out the hypocrisy in addition to the kind of hypocrisy of like calling her out as a journalist, talking about apartheid and Israel. So I want to encourage our listeners and viewers to check out what she said on YouTube. It's very compelling, but she's not the first, and she won't be the last person who. And let's be clear, Jamal, it's because it's in this country, because people are able to articulate it and speak about this a little bit more freely in other places.
A little bit. I would say a little bit.
But they're more free to talk about this in the apartheid state than they are here, is basically my point.
Well, here, but also in Europe, we've discussed what happened to Palestinian journalists working for Deutsche Welle
Right.
And
Right.
one Palestinian, one Jordanian, and I think four working for Deutsche Welle who were fired, and actually there was a lawsuit, and which found out that Deutsche Welle was wrong. But again, as you mentioned, Halper is far from the first to be fired for her free speech, for her pro-Palestinian, I would say, free speech. Mark Lamont Hill lost his position at CNN for a speech calling for a free Palestine from the river to the sea, which he did not say on CNN. He was, like, I think, invited to a panel by the United Nations or something like that. So he got fired. And then Current Affairs, that's why I said also Current Affairs editor Nathan Robinson lost his regular column he had written for years for The Guardian, for 4 years, I should say, and that's the British Guardian, after sarcastically just tweeting that Congress is not actually permitted to authorize any new spending unless a portion of it is directed toward buying weapons for Israel. That's his tweet. He got fired. This is the British progressive liberal Guardian. He got fired. And then, what was it, last week or the week before, we talked about Facebook. I mean,
that's right.
We don't want to talk about legacy media, but also in social media. And now there was a whole investigation and a whole report conducted to see about Facebook censorship, which, by the way, was commissioned by Facebook. And
that's right. This was a study they commissioned.
They commissioned, which found basically that
they censor Palestinian voices
all the time. So there is that whole double standard, whether it is in news reporting, whether it's in editorial, whether it's in moderating Palestinian voices or Palestinian posts versus Israeli ones.
But I think this is something that is a little more specific, which we need to continue to highlight, which is Katie Halper is not a Palestinian. She's not a partisan. She is a journalist, podcaster, comedian. She also happens to be Jewish American. And a journalist being able to articulate, ironically, under the First Amendment, her ability to speak and articulate whatever she wants. She gets crucified. She gets attacked. She gets fired for this. And it's the classic PEP, Jamal, progressive except for Palestine, whether it's The Guardian, whether it's progressive media in Europe, whether it's The Hill, which is arguably, I don't know if I'd call it progressive. They claim to be nonpartisan, but the point is you can be fired for that, but not be fired for calling. And I mean, you can call Joe Biden whatever you want in this country. You can issue death threats against a senator and his wife, which is what Donald Trump did last week against Mitch McConnell and his wife, and get away with it. But if you happen to speak your opinion based on facts that other NGOs have determined that Israel practiced apartheid, you're going to get fired. You're going to get crucified, and you'll be fired.
Well, my question to you about this is this actually working for them? I mean,
well, I think it's backfiring. It is backfiring. I mean,
2 weeks
it's two
ago
things.
we had also a guest we should mention who left her job at Google.
Right.
Also for a whole thing about Israeli spyware and wherever, exposing Google for collaborating with the Israeli military.
Right.
And she was forced to basically leave her job. She quit along with others.
Well, is it working? No, it's not working in a sense, Jamal, because people don't feel fearful anymore. Yes, they may lose their job, but it's not stopping them from speaking. That's number one. But I think the other angle on this speaks to the desperation of AIPAC, to the desperation of pro-Israel forces in the United States, to the desperation they feel that they have to fire and attack people for, basically speaking their mind. So their desperation is speaking very loud.
You're listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco, 89.5 FM. We're moving on to our next story, just October 2nd, basically yesterday.
Can you believe it's 4 years?
Yeah, October 2nd, 2018, 4 years ago, Jamal Khashoggi, journalist, was murdered in Istanbul at the Saudi embassy. I had to repeat the story. Everyone knows the story. Chopped, his corpse was chopped to pieces. They never found where his remains are. And all roads led to MBS. And somehow he wiggled his way now back, courting the international community, President Biden traveling all the way to Saudi Arabia, shaking hands with him, or fist bumping, whatever, the fist bump, the famous one. And so people are not speaking about him anymore, in a way, kind of like this 40 years ago. The only time we hear about Saudi Arabia is in context of the war in the Ukraine, about oil production. So we need the Saudis, we meaning the West needs the Saudis and everybody else because of the war in the Ukraine. So sadly, his story is disappearing, except for an anniversary like this, or when other journalists remember him. But in this case, his wife,
widow.
His widow, she wrote an editorial still questioning the validity of the investigation. But I thought there was a very important piece in her writing, which actually makes a lot of sense, because she's talking about key pieces of evidence that hold answers to his death, which is Mr. Khashoggi's personal devices: 2 mobile telephones, a laptop, and a tablet, which are in the possession of the Turkish government. They haven't released that. They haven't released the information on these things. There is also the camera surveillance from both the Saudi embassy and the Turkish police or Turkish security and other businesses there, and also the connection that she herself, because she found that later on, her own mobile devices,
cell phone, right?
Pegasus was actually, she was monitored through Pegasus by the Saudi government, or who others, I guess, but mostly we know it's Saudi Arabia. And so she's saying, which is, I want to read actually maybe her last sentence, where she says the Turkish government has been clear that it does not intend to proceed with either the investigation into my husband's murder or the trial. It should therefore hand over any evidence still in its hands to me. As the only wife of Jamal upon his death, I want all parties to be held accountable for my husband's murder, including the governments of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and the Israeli NSO group.
Very powerful, Jamal. Very powerful. It's a very powerful statement. And the fact that she included the NSO and the makers of Pegasus software, which directly contributed, enhanced, facilitated the brutal murder of her husband, is very telling. You know, I want to go back to something you said before. I mean, his brutal murder shocked the world. People are not talking about it. MBS got away literally with murder, but it's not just getting away with murder. As you said, he's being celebrated, he's being courted, he's being fist bumped. As the price of oil, and the demand for oil goes up, his celebrity and embrace by the world community is getting even larger. He's dancing with Vladimir Putin politically, Jamal, and is not being held accountable for this brutal murder. He's being celebrated. I mean, you call it just a fist bump, but for the president of the United States to go to Riyadh, for MBS to come to the United States. The president flew to Riyadh to fist bump MBS. It's disgusting.
We should say it's not just like about optics, Jess, but also President Biden made a promise. He said that during his campaign. I mean,
absolutely.
We hold politicians responsible for their words, not just their actions. But he said specifically when he was campaigning, what did he say about MBS?
Well, I don't remember exactly what he said, but he called Saudi Arabia a pariah state. I mean, he used the word pariah. He'll work to keep it a pariah. All of those things, hold them accountable. All this kind of rhetoric about what he says about MBS and the Saudis for their grotesque human rights violations, and then he goes and fist bumps him. So, what message do you think that sends to MBS? It says, I can get away with anything. I can do whatever I want, and nobody's going to hold me accountable. That's basically what it says.
Well, he reminds me of Donald Trump, basically, who said that he can kill anyone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it. Well, MBS did that and killed a journalist who lived in the United States and got away with it. And that's the sad thing about it. And that's all for oil. Really, it's all about dollars. It's all about petrodollars. It's all about oil that he's given a pass. And actually, I think also Turkey does not have clean hands in this. They're playing.
Oh, absolutely not, Jamal.
They know,
absolutely not.
I mean, they know a lot more that they are not sharing because, again, they don't want to rock the boat with Saudi Arabia. They don't want to rock the boat with the United States. They want to play kind of in the middle, maybe holding on evidence that they're going to use as leverage in the future. But sadly, we haven't seen justice for the widow of Jamal Khashoggi.
No, it's very sad, Jamal, because, in spite of the rhetoric, despite the rhetoric, we find that this man's brutal murder and assassination, there's no other way to talk about it, is going to go unaccounted for. No one will be held accountable, neither the UAE nor MBS nor the Turkish government, and sadly, not even Joe Biden will be held accountable for what happened to this journalist. I feel sorry for the journalism community. I feel sorry for Jamal and his widow. But I feel like we have to continue to cover this story, Jamal, because as the price of oil goes up and the demand for oil goes up, MBS continues to be embraced as an incredibly, if not one of the most important world leaders right now. And by the way, I should add that OPEC Plus just announced that they're going to cut back oil production so that the price can go back up above $100 a barrel. So what are we going to do, man? We have to keep Jamal Khashoggi's legacy and story alive, which we will continue to do.
You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco. I just want to say one thing. We're going to go on a short hiatus, but we have plenty of shows right there. You can go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download any shows that you have missed, and we will see you in 4 weeks or so.
Yep. See you then.